Hi everyone, welcome to Sea Life's YouTube channel. We're so glad that you're joining us today. If you're interested and want to connect with us a little bit more, visit sealifec.com/connect. Now, enjoy this message.
Well, you're welcome to have a seat. So glad that you're here with us today. And also want to welcome those that are joining us online and say we're especially grateful for those joining us from the Kaufman County Detention Center. Would everybody just give them a warm welcome? We're glad that we got folks joining us. We are in week 3 of our series, Never Too Far Gone, and I'm just going to go ahead and throw it out there. I think sometimes we think the good old days were better than the good old days actually were. Going to get an amen from anybody? I know, because I say to my kids, I've caught myself saying this recently, well, back in my day, and then I'm like, what happened? When did I become my grandfather? Because that's what he would say to me. But I get all nostalgic about the way things used to be. We're like, well, back in my day, everybody didn't have their face in a phone and they weren't always captivated by a screen. We didn't even have color on our TV, right? And it's like, yeah, but you also were going to die from the cold, like just having a cold, right? Because medicine wasn't the way it is now. You didn't have air conditioning or heating. Can anybody remember like how it was back in the day? And is anybody willing to just go on record to say it wasn't that great? Like it just wasn't that great. Because we have a tendency, I believe, to edit our memories. We get a little further away and we look back and we kind of edit out the stuff that wasn't that great or whatever else, and we build this new narrative. And you're like, I don't even know that that's possible. Well, I wouldn't expect you to believe me. I'm not a psychologist. I don't even know for sure if psychology is the one who would figure this out. But there is a guy named Arthur Brooks. He's an author, and he has an ongoing article series in The Atlantic titled How to Build a Life. And in an article in June of 2022, he wrote this about memory. He said, modern neuroscience shows that memory is more about reconstruction than it is about retrieval. Each time we conjure up the past, a part of the parietal lobe called the angular gyrus, again, smart people, but it's in your head up here somewhere, pieces together various bits of stored information to assemble a memory. This process is a biological marvel, but it's prone to change with time, as researchers have shown in various ways over the past few decades. For example, he says that shortly after the explosion of the Challenger space shuttle in 1986, there were 2 psychologists who asked university students to recount in detail how they heard the news of the event. And then 30 months later, so it wasn't really that long after, 30 months later, they asked the exact same students, the exact same questions, assuming that they would get the exact same responses. But in 93% of the cases, the accounts were inconsistent despite the respondents remembering the details vividly and feeling confident in their memories. And then he goes on to say this: the reason our memories change is that, and really hone in on this, we reconstruct the stories of past events in accordance with our current self-narratives. So what's he saying? He's saying this, that you and I, we have the ability to edit our memories. This is a really powerful insight, especially whenever we think about good and evil in the world. This tool that we have, this ability to edit our memories, if leveraged properly, can have really, really significant impact on our faith, because we're constantly editing our memories, and those edits have a profound impact on our lives. But I don't want to leave out the faith portion of that. So in this series, week 1, it was like a really difficult sermon to preach. All of us on all the different campuses were like, oh man, this one's a tough one. So much, it was just really graphic in detail of some of the atrocious, horrendous, terrible things that took place in a certain portion of the text, in a portion of Christian history, the history of God. And what was really interesting about it, if you didn't hear that message, I would encourage you to go back to sealifec.com and pull that down. You can podcast it, you can video watch it, whatever you want to do on demand. But I would encourage you to listen to that, because it set up kind of the foundation of this whole series. Because what we realize in that really grotesque, horrible story is that the people doing the really horrible, grotesque things were God's people. And so we have to ask the question, what happened in their lives that allowed them to go down a certain path or these different paths that would lead them away from being obedient to God and instead do the things that they wanted to do. The text actually said that because there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So it makes us wonder what in the world went wrong? Where did they go off track? And why is that important? It's important because we want to trace their steps so that we could see, are we on some of these same paths that are going to get us to a place of disobedience and rebellion against the God of our salvation? And we want to say, oh, we don't want to go down that path. So that's what this series is about. And so last week, we jumped into what one of those kind of misdirects was for them. And today, I want to talk about another issue that they face, that we too face, and we're going to have to be really careful and cognizant of it so that we don't go down the same path. How did Israel, how did the people of God go down a path of such depravity and evil and darkness? And we want to get to the bottom of that. So the book of Judges is where all of this text is coming from. And early on in Judges, it kind of goes up 30,000 feet and gives us a synopsis view of what it was taking place. Judges 2, verses 7 and 8 says this: "The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua." And then notice this: "who had seen all of the great work that the Lord had done for Israel." This is really important that we don't miss that. These people that we're talking about were the ones who were kids whenever they crossed through the Red Sea, which was a miraculous thing. We'll talk more about it in just a minute. But the people that we're now talking about that have departed from obedience from God, they had seen the miraculous work of God on their behalf. And yet something happened, and we got to ask the question, did they forget or did they edit? Because it's possible that they simply edited their memories based on their current self-narrative. Now, we got to remember that these people also, all of their parents had died because whenever they got to the other side of the Red Sea and they were going to go into the Promised Land, this is our message from last week, are you going to choose fear over faith, or are you going to choose faith over fear? And they decided to fear and told God and their leaders, hey, we can't go in there because those people are really tall and it's just going to go bad for us, so we're not going to do it. And God's like, okay, well, this is the Promised Land I promised to give you, and since you're not going to have courage and faith in me, after all the things that I've done, I'm going to let you wander around in the wilderness for 40 years so that this generation can die off. And then your kids and grandkids will get to go in to the Promised Land. And so that's the group of people that we're talking about. Judges 2:10 says this: "And all of that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not," here we go, "know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel." How is that even possible? That they would not have known the great work that God had done for their forefathers. Surely these people had told their kids how God had miraculously delivered them out of slavery in Egypt, and how he had sent Moses, and Moses told Pharaoh, he's like, you got to let these people go. Pharaoh was resistant, and so there was all these plagues that started to enter into the equation, water turning to blood, frogs, and this is just a side note in case you need this at any point in your life. I'm not scared of a whole lot of things, but I am terrified of frogs. This is a true story. And I know somebody's like, give me your man card. Never was issued one, so it's cool, all right? I don't know. My brother, when he found out I was scared of frogs, he would hold me down when I was a kid and put them on my face and stuff. I'm like, Frogs are of the devil. If you have a spider or a snake or something like that and you need somebody to come help take care of it, I'm your guy. But if you have a frog, burn down the whole thing, right? Are we good? Okay. Now, I know some of y'all are like, you're just a baby. You shouldn't be scared of frogs. None of your business. Okay, here we go. Lice, flies, livestock pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, the killing of firstborn children. And so Pharaoh says, you know what? I'm going to let y'all go. And so Moses starts to lead all of these people out of captivity. And once they all got on their way, Pharaoh said, you know what? I've thought about it. I've changed my mind. And so he sends his army to chase after these people. And they find themselves with the Red Sea in front of them, the Egyptian army behind them. And like, what in the world are we supposed to do? And God performs these miracles. And again, I'll talk more about it in just a minute. But once they get to the other side of this Red Sea, listen to what the people who had been crying out to God for generations, deliver us. We don't want to be captivated by the Egyptians anymore. We want to be freed. We're your people, and surely you see our affliction. God, will you please rescue us? God does, and then listen to what they say. They say to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Now, everybody's paying attention. Is that what they actually said? Or are they editing? They're editing. Luckily, Moses kept the receipts. He knew what had been said. He knew that in Exodus 2:23 it was recorded, the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, and they cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. They were editing their memories based on their current self-narrative. We're good at this. Y'all know, like, we do this too. I was trying to think of an example, and even though there were a lot, I thought this one maybe would be the most beneficial to all the men in the room. You know this week is Valentine's, right? Nod. Okay. And even if you have been told, let's not do anything for each other this year, on Valentine's Day, social media will be populated with what everybody else is doing. And even though you kept the receipts and had really good notes and the minutes from your last meeting with your wife or significant other, like, even though it's crystal clear what was actually said, there may be some editing that takes place that afternoon. Because everybody else, are we all together on what I'm trying to communicate, men? No matter what was said, there's a chance that some editing will take place, because based on our current circumstances, when nobody else was getting anything, when nobody else was bragging about all the cool stuff, whenever nobody else felt loved and adored or whatever else, it was perfectly fine for us to ignore this. But on the 14th in the afternoon, once we've started to scroll and see, we tend to edit our memories. Moses didn't even flinch whenever these people were doing this. He said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm. See the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You have only to be silent." So they're on this side of the Red Sea, and they're like, "We're all going to die. The Egyptians are behind us. We're going to be fish food, basically. There's no out here, and you should have just left us in Egypt." But Moses said, "Stop it. God has always been faithful." And then God gets a little sassy. I like sassy God. He said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward, and then whenever you get there, lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground." So a lot of us are familiar with this story, and it's kind of become old news for us. Can you imagine being Moses on that day? You're just standing there with your staff saying, "Hey, they're all griping and complaining, saying we should have just left them in Egypt. I kind of think we should have. But now I've got a mess on my hands, because here we are with all of them, and we had a sea. We got, God, I don't know if you're paying attention or not, but this is kind of a bad situation." And God's like, "Don't cry to me about it. You see that staff in your hand? Hold it up over the sea, and I'm going to divide the sea, and you're going to walk through on dry ground." Can you imagine Moses standing there like this? Looking at that staff, like, really? And this is why God won't ever give me a staff, because I'd have been like, "Hi-ya!" Like I'd have been trying to do all kinds of stuff with it, right? But what does he do? He takes the staff, he holds it out over the sea, and the sea begins to roll up on both sides. Angel of God behind Israel, and between them and the Egyptian army. This is what the text tells us. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Can you even imagine what this would have been like? And can you fathom, is there even a remote possibility that these people didn't tell their kids and their grandkids this story? You know they told you. How many of you have had grandparents tell you a story that maybe you weren't as interested in as they were, but they told you the story maybe multiple times because it was such an important moment in their lives? All of us have had people tell us these kinds of stories, and I'm convinced that they told their kids and they told their grandkids this story. Why do I think that? Well, because I've seen people and heard people, and I've actually done this myself. If you go to a really great aquarium and you walk through one of those tubes, I know the new maybe is worn off for you at this point, but the first time that you went to a really great aquarium and they're like, walk down this hallway and you turn the corner and suddenly you are in the aquarium. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And fish are swimming over you, and here's what winds up happening. We tell everybody about it. Like, you got to go to this aquarium. I'm telling you what, sharks just swimming right over the top of you. Nemo fish. I don't know why the sharks don't eat the Nemo fish. I don't know. But we want to tell everybody about any of these great experiences that we have ever had. They literally saw a sea that was going to be their demise, rolled up on both sides, and then walked through on dry ground. We can't, for even a second, assume they didn't tell that story. I promise you, the guy that had a fishing pole with him told that story. He lied all that probably about it. He's like, I was walking through there, and I don't know, there's a traffic jam, so I just took out my pole, threw in a hook, just in that one wall on the left, because I saw some big, you know what I'm talking about? You know this guy. And then even if the fish was this big, he told everybody it was this big, right? There's no conceivable way they didn't tell their kids. So either the next generation forgot or they edited their memories. It didn't stop there. Not only was the sea divided, but they needed food, and God provided manna from heaven. So morning, noon, and night, they had manna to eat. Whenever they had their fill of manna, they're like, God, do you have anything else on the menu? He sends them some quail. They get to a place where they didn't have any water. You got to have water in order to survive. So he told Moses to take that staff and hit a rock. So he hit the rock, and water came out of the rock and provided enough water for everybody. I mean, miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. How did their kids not know? Is it even possible that they would have forgotten? God explicitly told them, tell your kids. Exodus 10, 1-2 says, then the Lord said to Moses, go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine among them, and that you, here we go, may tell in the hearing of your son and your grandson how I have dealt harshly with the Egyptians and what signs I have done among them, that you may know I am the Lord. And when God told the Israelites to commemorate the Passover every year with the Passover feast, he told them this in Exodus chapter 12. He said, you shall observe this rite as a statute for you and for your sons forever. And whenever you come to the land that the Lord will give you as he has promised, you shall keep this service. And when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? You will say to them, you're going to tell your kids, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, for he passed over the house of the people of Israel in Egypt whenever he struck the Egyptians, but he spared our houses. Exodus 13 says it again. Deuteronomy 4:9 says this, only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you what? Forget the things that your eyes have seen, unless they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children. How on that day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, and the Lord said to me, gather the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children also. It is not possible that they didn't tell their kids this story. So what happened? Did they forget, or did they edit? Now, I'm willing to give a little bit of freedom to say it's possible that they forgot, because I've raised kids. Anybody in here ever raised kids? And I can say to my kids, hey, listen, we're not doing anything this morning, like on a Saturday or whatever, except you got to clean your room. And so I'm going to come back and check in about an hour just to make sure that it's clean. We good? Yeah, we're good. So then I come back in an hour, they're on a device, they're watching TV, out shooting baskets, whatever it is. I look at their room, I look at the minutes from our previous meeting. I can tell I was clear, and I go and I say, hey, so what happened? What are you talking about? Like cleaning room. Oh, what did they say? I forgot. This was an hour ago. And whenever I'm thinking about being really tough on them for that, I have to back up a little bit because I do the same thing. My wife can say, hey, do you mind running to Walmart or to Brookshire's or whatever to get this one thing? Like, we need this one thing. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. That's not a problem. And just text it to me so that I'll have it, and I'll be sure and get what we need. It's like, great. So I go to Walmart immediately. About an hour and a half later, I've got a basket full of stuff, $300 worth. And I get home and we're unloading. She's like, whoa, I wasn't expecting you to get all this. I was just trying to be helpful, whatever. We get everything unloaded and unpacked. She's like, well, where is that? And I'm like, And what do I say? I forgot. So I think it's possible that they forgot. But I think it's more probable that they edited their memories based on their current self-narrative. So here's what we know. We know the Israelites were miserable in Egypt. We know Pharaoh had dealt with them shrewdly. We know that he had ordered their sons to be thrown in the Nile. They cried out to God for deliverance. God provided Moses and delivered them miraculously at the Red Sea. He provided manna. He did all of that. They then said, why didn't you just leave us in Egypt? It would have been better for us to die in Egypt. So we have to figure out what changed. And I think what changed was God had answered their prayer. So he took them out of Egypt and he brought them into the promised land, right? Or he brings them into the wilderness whenever they rebelled, and then brings them in the promised land later. They got what they wanted, but they thought that whenever they got what they wanted, that all of their problems would go away. And I think for a lot of us, we feel like we've embraced this kind of weird theology that's just not accurate or biblical, that if we will surrender our lives to God, then all of our problems are just going to go away. And that's not true at all. And then whenever we get an answer to the prayer that we've been praying, when it's not exactly playing out the way we thought it would, then we start to shake our fist at the God who delivered us. That's what they did. They get to this place and they realize, look, we are living in tents. We're in the wilderness. We're hungry and we're tired. And we thought, God, whenever we got away from our problems in Egypt, we would no longer have any problems. But they realized they just had a new set of problems. And that's how our life goes. Well, if I could just get married, if I could just get this degree, if I could just have some kids, if I could just make more money, if I could just get this promotion, if I could just. And so often we see that God makes it possible for us to receive some of these things, and we only to realize that it didn't really solve anything. Like, I'm so grateful that my wife and I were able to have kids, and I love my kids, and I try to honor them publicly. It's hard to be a preacher's kid. I get that. But I can tell you this, whenever they were little and in diapers, I can remember looking at my wife saying, we are going to go bankrupt on diapers. Like, diapers are expensive and formula is expensive. And man, if we could just get them out of diapers. Well, I didn't know. And in case you don't know, cars are more expensive than diapers. And insurance is more expensive than diapers. And college is more expensive than, and I know there's some out here saying, well, you shouldn't pay for all that. You know what? Mind your own, okay? This is what I've got myself into. It's just more expensive. So I thought if these certain things would finally line up, then everything's going to be great. I guarantee you there's somebody listening to this message right now in this room or online who is now lamenting what came along with God's answer to something you prayed for previously. And because of that, you've chosen to edit your memories. and it's caused you to see God in a different way that's not biblical. You started to focus more on your problems than on his provision. You spend more time thinking about your difficulties than you do the deliverance that you've received from God. And the enemy is telling you all of these lies about your past and causing you to start wondering, has God ever really been there for me? I mean, I've had to do this, and I've had to do that, and if God was so good, then why this and why that? And all of that is just, for the believers in there, like you're editing your memories. And it's been a long time since you just kind of stepped back maybe and thought about the truth of how faithful God has been. And I get it. You're like, some of you are in a season right now where you're going, man, it is hard. We're broke. Our relationship is fractured. My kids are rebellious. There's all kinds of issues. I've got this health crisis that's going on. And I understand. Like, I'm not making light of any of that, because I know in those moments that it is really easy to say, God, where are you? I thought following you would, and then fill in the blank. Like, I get that it's really easy to do that, but my goodness, what if we stopped editing our memories based on our current self-narrative and instead just looked at how faithful God has proven himself to be? Because these people, right, they're like, we never asked you to take us out of Egypt. Yes, you did. And he did. And we're not that different from them. Some of you have prayed for a spouse, and you're like, he gave me a spouse. But you look at God, and you're like, I didn't want an annoying one. Right? God, will you give us a baby? And God gives you one, and suddenly it's more expensive than you thought. You're really tired. You're like, am I ever going to sleep all night again? It's created stress on your marriage that you never thought would be a part of it. You prayed for a job, but this job is causing you to burn the candle at both ends, and there's just nothing left of you whenever you get home. We've all found ourselves at different times complaining about the very things we were previously praying for. You know it's true. And I think it's because we've spent too much time editing instead of spending enough time remembering. That's how it played out for the Israelites. It took them 22 days to get from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai. The people start getting anxious because he's up there for 40 days. Exodus 32:1 says, when the people saw that Moses, remember, these are the people that know the story of God's faithfulness. They know his ability to do the miraculous. Whenever Moses was delayed from coming down the mountain, the people gathered themselves together, Aaron, and said to him, make us up gods who shall go before us. So Aaron collected all of their gold jewelry, melted it down, fashioned it into the shape of a calf, and these people started to worship. They idolized a golden calf. Exodus 32:4. These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. This is just a few months after they walked through the Red Sea. You can't convince me that they forgot. They were editing. And I know the pushback, there's some man here who's like, well, I'll tell you what, preacher. That's just foolishness to idolize a golden calf. And it does sound a little silly to us, doesn't it? But maybe I could describe a couple of our modern day golden calves. There's a lot of people that idolize their kids. A lot of people idolize their spouse. A lot of people, their primary pursuit in life is to find pleasure. There are people sitting in this room watching online that you find your identity in your job. It may not be a golden calf. That just seems silly. But we've all got our idols. And the question is, along the way, whenever we decided to put whatever it is for you on the throne of your heart, what did you edit out about God's faithfulness that made you feel like that was an appropriate switch? because we haven't forgotten. We've just done some editing. And while it's all good and well, until it's not good and well, right? Whenever you bump into something and you're like, man, I need provision, I need deliverance, I need help, I need something supernatural to help, like to help me get through this, guess what won't be able to provide that? Your kid, your spouse, your job, your bank account. Like we understand, right? We've got to make sure that we see what happened to these people, because this whole series is we want to retrace their steps so that we don't go down the same path. And the only way we're going to stop from going down the same path is by remembering. Moses told Aaron, he said, I want you to get a jar, and I want you to fill it up with manna, and I want you to keep that with you so that anytime you doubt my power, anytime you doubt my provision, anytime you doubt my authority, I want you to whip out that jar and take a look, because it is so important that you remember. Remembering things is not just an exercise of nostalgia. Remembering the faithfulness of God is essential for our spiritual health. And my question for you today, believers, is do you remember how faithful God has been? Several years ago, we did a series, and one Sunday we gave everybody jars. There's a lot more of you now, and we didn't feel like it was a proper use of $6,000 to buy jars, so go buy your own. Good, okay. But we ask everybody, why don't you take this jar home and put some things in there that are just reminders of the faithfulness of God. And I wanted to share mine with you today because I hope that you find it encouraging. This bracelet I got on my first trip to Africa. And there's a backstory. And the backstory really is I didn't want to go to Africa. I didn't want to go anywhere but the United States of America. And not because of any kind of just pride in our nation. I just was scared to travel. I wasn't sure what I was going to be getting into. If I went anywhere, will they have hospitals? Will I like the food? No jokes there. But I was asking these questions. I didn't know. I was scared. And there was just a series of events that happened where basically I didn't have any way out of it. And I finally said, I will go. And there's no preacher hyperbole in this. Whenever I say God used this trip to literally change the trajectory of my life and ministry. I'll never forget it. There's some of you that need to go on a mission trip and you've been hesitant because you're not sure what we'll eat. Is there anything I can do? Am I too old? Will there be hospitals? I'm just telling you, God will be faithful. This next thing is off of one of my wife's old key rings. It says Baylor. Hold your applause. Just kidding. We met at Baylor. I cannot imagine my life without this woman by my side. She has weathered every storm with me, holding my hand through it all. A lot of jokes can be made about this next one. This is a donut. This reminds me of starting Community Life Church. The very first Sunday, y'all realized we only had to buy I think we bought 3 or 4 dozen donuts because we weren't planning to give them out every week for free. But this was a Red Sea moment for me. Everything was on the line. It was like this, it either works or it doesn't work. Only God can make it work. We don't know. I never want to forget the faithfulness of God. Speaking of my wife, this is a fortune from a fortune cookie. There was a really cheap Chinese buffet close to the university when we were dating. And we enjoyed eating this Chinese food. And kind of deep into our relationship, we both opened our fortune cookies and they said the exact same thing. And I don't give any credence to a fortune cookie, but it was kind of cool because it says, a happy lot awaits you in matrimony. And I thought, what are the odds? So I kept it. I've got a ring in here from my stepdad who came into my life when I was 4 years old and has never looked away. He's been present at the birth of all my children, the baptism of my children, birthday parties, vacations. He put me through college. I will never be able to let this man know how grateful and thankful I am. And I see him as a gift from God. I've got a picture of my mom in here when she was a little girl, the trauma that she would face from this point forward in her childhood is unthinkable. But yet she came out of it on the other side with gratitude in her heart for a loving God. She's been a light for me in so many ways. It's a picture of my dad, biological dad. He came to faith in Jesus 11 years ago. He didn't know how badly I needed to hear him say he was proud of me until the day he did. And all of these things remind me of the faithfulness of God. Whatever you're going through, whatever your circumstance is, can I encourage you to know this? The memory of how faithful he has been is what should fuel our faith in him today. Don't edit. Remember. Jesus told his disciples on the night that he was betrayed that he wanted them to remember. So we're going to share communion together today. Jesus wanted this to remind them and us of his sacrifice. And it says, as they sat around the table, Jesus took the bread and he broke it. He gave thanks for it, and then he said, this represents my body. It's going to be crucified for you. So as often as you take this, listen to what he said, I want you to remember. With grateful hearts today, we remember. And after they finished the bread, he took the cup, he blessed it, and then he passed it around and he said, drink this, and let it be a reminder to you of my blood that will be shed for you. So today we drink this and we remember his sacrifice. Well, God, we're real good at editing. And sadly, we're not so good at remembering. We recognize today that that's why you told us so often in the scripture to remember. And so all across this room, regardless of what battle is just before someone or what battle they are currently in the middle of or the battle that somebody's coming out of, God, would you just through your Spirit remind us of how faithful you have been. We give you the glory for that in Jesus' name. Amen.